You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss playing online. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing well, Jody. I am a somewhat terminally online person, so this episode fits right into my usual lifestyle.
There it is, the yin and yang that is you and technology. I find it fascinating and have just a passing interest here. I'm just along for the ride on this one. So, Matt, why don't you take us to the internet?
I will. The virtual table, Jody. So I run a weekly 5th edition game online for your daughter, her friend, and my sister. That game has been going for a long time. It actually started as a duet game between my sister and I. We were playing old school essentials in Dolmenwood way back when the product was still in its infancy on Patreon. And that morphed in to bringing in your daughter. We were still playing OSE and still playing Dolmenwood. And then we started a 5th edition game about a year ago. And about 6 months ago, we added another player. So that game's going strong. We are probably about halfway to a third of the way through the campaign. We're going to try and do it all the way to level 20.
Hallowed ground.
Well, we'll see. I hope we can get there. I have also run a couple of games recently for some folks on the Discord. We played in Dolmenwood using Shadowdark rules and had a great time. I ran 2 different sessions, and it was wonderful. I also got to be a player in Evo Unnamed, a.k.a. John's Dungeon of the Mad Mage open table game. So I think I have some good, solid experience with online play.
All right, let's gather around this virtual fire of ignorance in my case. I'm going to go ahead and address that right off the top.
You don't like playing online.
I love playing online. I have no interest in GMing online.
Okay,
so as this is Dungeon Master Diaries, I have an empty spot in my dungeon diary.
But you have played online.
I have. I played through the Horror on the Orient Express. I think I have that right. The Call of Cthulhu Grand Campaign. It was rad. It was amazing. It took about a year. It was a pandemic game. Loved it, and would happily join and play a game again. The digital virtual gulf twixt me and GMing via the computer. I think on our Discord I sent a picture of the picture from Zoolander of them acting as though they are apes slapping computers. That feels like me whenever I try and learn new technology. You are a tech lover. Are you not? You like gadgets. You like Gizmo. You like figuring out tech stuff, right? Like
I do. I want to
kind of put that at the top. Whereas I am a Luddite, and I still believe fire is best started with stick and stone.
Well, okay, so I'll couch that at least for my preferences. My preferences for technology are pretty idiosyncratic, as I think a lot of people's are, especially nowadays. But technology, when it comes to gaming, I have a very weird way of interacting with it, because if we're playing in person, I basically like as little technology as possible, basically none. Like we specifically use physical hourglass timers for our torch timers. We we don't have computers open at the table. Like, no one at our table uses PDFs regularly unless they're looking something up really quick from like an email. Like I know I see people sometimes, I'll reference something in our Domewood game and they'll quickly like reference an email that I sent out with like a little bit of information or something like that. Other than that, our in-person games are basically void of technology. Playing online, I like to try and get as close to that as possible. So I don't know how that's... I frankly, I think this would be an interesting episode to get people's reaction to, because there are lots of people that I see on the Discord and other places who have in-person games that are maybe primarily centered around technology, like a television kind of dropped into a table and stuff like that. And that's just not where I'm at. I only want to get to know the tech that is going to get me closer to that feeling of playing at the table, which from the top, I just want to point out, for me, it is not possible to do that online. And if that is what you are seeking, if you're seeking a game that resembles an in-person game online, I think that is a poison pill from the beginning. Like, it is a fundamentally different experience. So, I don't know. From that, yes, I like technology. Yeah, I in my kind of broader life, yes, I tend to kind of dabble and like to learn new things and whatnot. But for gaming, it is very, very specific to this kind of pipe dream I have of trying to make it feel like we're at a table.
Well, let me speak to what I think you actually glossed over there, and I know to be an area of genuine, I dare say, not a professional expertise, but a hobby expertise of yours that you did not touch on, that does cross the in-person to digital gulf and serves us incredibly well for our podcast. There is a name for it even as a hobby. You love sound, speakers, microphones, the audio quality.
Yeah, I tend to be somewhat of a low-grade audiophile. And
when we play in person, this is a piece of tech that you both as a GM and player need. Like, I genuinely hope what I provide is sufficient to not cause disruption for you. There has to be music. There has to be a soundscape.
Let's start here.
Yeah.
Because this is, for me, yes. I've talked about it on a previous ep, but for me, music is central. For in-person games, I use Fubar 2000, which is I have all of my music kind of native on my hard drive. I don't like using Spotify. I don't like using, because then you have to deal with Wi-Fi issues
or commercials
or commercials. And this is the thing that I am probably way too anal retentive about this. But when it comes to music and it comes to atmosphere, my goal is always to make it feel as seamless as possible, and also to be able to change the mood on a dime. And so figuring out how to use music online, to kind of bring it back to the subject of the episode, has been a struggle for me, because there's so many ways to do it. And the ways that I play online and the platform that I use, the virtual tabletop that I use, does not have integrated audio capabilities. So I'll just say from the get-go here, let me run down my online platform and kind of what I use. I use Owlbear Rodeo primarily as our VTT of choice. It's virtual tabletop for the Luddites in the audience, Jody. We can talk more about that. For audio, if I am playing on Discord, I use Kenku FM, which is actually adjacent to Owlbear Rodeo, which plays through Discord into an audio and video channel. It is actually a bot that sits there and plays music as if it were another person in the room. For our Monday night game, because my sister's computer is kind of crappy, we have to play using Zoom, because Discord, I don't know if you know this, Jody, is a drag on people's CPU and memory. Like, if you don't have a computer that's like of reasonably new quality or whatever, which my sister doesn't, it is a real drag, and it can create problems. And so in order to facilitate a game that actually works, we use Zoom. And I use a program called Voice Meter, which allows me to create and I just figured out how to do this like a week ago, and I'm very happy about it, Jody. So Voice Meter, and the links to all this stuff will be in the show notes. Voice Meter is essentially a virtual audio platform where you have inputs and outputs, and you can basically fool your computer and the various programs therein into like where audio is coming from, and you can feed it through a channel. And so I can play music and have my microphone both coming out and into Zoom using this virtual audio platform. So that's what I do. And music is truly central to it, as is the quality of my voice. So take that for what it's worth, listeners, that like I am not as concerned with gameplay and mechanics. I am more concerned with the fidelity of my voice and the fidelity of sound in general.
Like crow sounds or bird sounds, right?
Oh my God.
All right, listeners, we genuinely try not to, other than what's necessary, let me tell you a story from my table. This is actually relevant and I think a cute, funny story, both about how charming your sister and, I'm biased, my kid are, and as players, but then also to emphasize this point around the audio. And then we'll take a step back from your proclivities. And maybe address a little bit more of a like, okay, let's drop back to the Luddite zone. Sure. And we'll unpack it there. But yeah, so why do I mention bird calls, Matt?
So for a long time, to record, we use a Rodecaster, which is made by the company Rode. It's a great kind of all-in-one podcast recording platform, and it has like built-in software and stuff that just makes it so much easier to record decent quality vocal, specifically spoken word audio. But it has a noise gate and some suppression technology and software that you can turn on and off. And for a long time, I didn't realize that the noise gate was gating my like various sound effects. And the noise gate's quite good. It's actually quite important, especially if you have like a fan on or whatever in the background. So I would be like making these crow sounds in particular, but also like all sorts of other sound effects, and all my sister and your daughter would see
on Zoom
would be me mouthing sounds, and no sound would be coming in. And they would consistently, for like months, they would just play it off. Like, and they would just kind of smile and go and like nod, like they heard me. Because I would say like, you hear a crow sound, and then I would like, apparently I just go like mouthing a crow sound.
So listeners, I'm going to jump in here real quick. If you're driving along, or you're sitting on a subway, or you're public transit, or you're just waiting somewhere, or hopefully you are, painting or hobbying away in a private location of your own embarrassment, that if you would make a bird sound, a caw, if you will. That was pedestrian and terrible. Matt's are quite good. And then think about the face you just made making no noise.
Like, I don't know if it's going to come up on the recording.
So technology sometimes has hiccups is the punchline on this.
Anyways, they eventually told me, they were like, dude,
are you making noise?
And it was so charming. It was so funny. But anyways, yeah, Jody, let's actually, this is probably not particularly useful for somebody who's like either interested in running online or interested in kind of being the Luddite. So I want to try and be useful. So
my experience in playing through an extended Call of Cthulhu campaign, we did the whole thing. It's not small. It was a year, I think, plus of once a week getting together for a few hours to play. And we did it all on Zoom, and then had, I believe it was Discord also running in the background just for die rolling. We handled dice rolling via a bot on Discord, so everybody could see everybody's rolls, which in Call of Cthulhu is actually particularly interesting because of margins of success, and people tend to act a little more independently. Ideally, you're not having a lot of big group fights with whatever horrible thing has emerged from the aether. So that was the tools we used, and I will say that the Zoom capacity just for audio video. And this was people with, headphones and not a bunch of tech folk. Admittedly, the person running it does have a tech background, and they have another podcast of their very own. So had, again, some experience in managing audio and some video and stuff like that. So there was some level of understanding. But for me, it was plug in earbuds on a wire into laptop, queue up Zoom, and go.
Yeah.
And was pretty seamless without all of the extra bells and whistles of soundscaping and all of those kind of things. And technology hiccups are still going to happen. We would have nights where it was stormy, and at the house I live in, if it rains really hard, my internet connection does get, I'm at the bottom of a hill going towards a lake. The whole street, the water runs towards our house. Eventually the old PG&E lines, and phone lines, whoever does our phone service that I can't remember the name of, eventually they get iffy on
sure
if there's enough water. So, and I think that is one of the, fear buffers for folks who maybe, if I'm being honest, like there is an amount of, I don't know if it's fear with me. It's just, I just don't want to figure it out. Like, I just don't, the notion of figuring it out is unappealing to me. And knowing that there will be hiccups, there will be things that come up and you're like, okay, how do I work around this? And there may be nights where you go, the computer gremlins say no, and it's just not happening.
Yeah.
You can mitigate a lot of that once you're comfortable with your platforms, I am sure. But to that question, Matt, I think that's one of the other big kind of elephants in the room is, all right, so somebody is like, man, I wish I could play online or run a game online, but I'm really nervous about it. Give us all of the stuff you just rattled off about like having a soundscape and this and that. That's not essential, obviously. Mm-hmm. Where is your start here, do this?
So I want to start off by saying that you do not need a virtual tabletop. You can play purely, theater of the mind. You don't need a virtual tabletop. But if you want to use one, and many people do, there are some things you need to keep in mind. And choosing a virtual tabletop is an essential first question. I think first and foremost, the number one answer is how much time do you want to put in, not to learning the rules of the game, not to prepping your session, but how much of a hobby do you want the actual running online to be? I think this actually, you 3D print a lot, and I actually would liken running online to 3D printing. It enables you to do your hobby, right? But it is almost a hobby unto itself, is it not?
Yeah, definitely.
So
airbrushing is very much the same way for mini painters out there. Like you can get one and go, and then there's a whole world of hobby to just that tool.
Right. And I would say that this is very similar, because for me, I am not willing to put in time learning something like the very popular for Shadow Dark Foundry, which I think if for those who are interested, there is I can hear the Foundry people right now, and I can hear them saying it's not actually that difficult. There's not a huge barrier to entry. Maybe there's not. I have not tried it. I just know that Foundry in general has a bunch of modules that can make it very complicated. And I think there is the reason to use Foundry, or excuse me, one of the reasons to use Foundry. I'm couching all this because I know that Foundry people are very passionate and it's a very good platform and a very good VTT. But I also think that sometimes the potential grandeur, the potential largesse of it gets in the way of people seeing that it might be an approachable platform. There's a bunch of stuff that you can graft on, and I don't want any of those options because me as a GM, I know I don't have any self-control, and I'm going to want to graft on all these things. And so that's the number one most essential thing is when you're picking a VTT, do you want to use the most bare bones, which could be a whiteboard? It could be one of the various whiteboard tools. There's one in Discord, I believe, but there's also a lot of other ones. What kind of game, and this is now asking another question, but still in the purpose of getting to the VTT, what kind of game are you running in terms of what do you want your players' roles and responsibilities to be? Will they be mapping? Is this a dungeon crawl specific game? Is it a hex crawl? You need to figure out like the kind of game you're running and then do a little bit of research on the VTT that is going to make it easiest to run that. And I think like ultimately all of the bells and whistles that you can apply, all the lighting effects and all the various things that you can apply on various platforms, those are great. But I oftentimes think that the most important thing about any VTT is clarity, like clarity of information. Can you, at a moment's notice, as a player and a GM, know what the hell is going on? And I don't know that there's a VTT that does that perfectly, but there are lots of VTTs that handle fog of war in different ways and allow for dynamic fog of war for each individual player sees their own thing. I am a fan of, again, keeping it as simple as possible, but the reason for that is purely clarity for my players and ease of use. Because the final essential question for a VTT is, what do you want your players to be required to learn? And for me, I am not willing to ask players to do almost any work that isn't character or game focused. And neither of those two things, to me, are using a VTT. So the most essential thing is figuring out what VTT you're going to use, because from that springs all of the other parts of your prep and all the other decisions you're making. And so I actually think that like people take this a little too seriously. I think you should just try stuff. Foundry costs money, but like, if you have the money to spend, like try it. It might be cool. I'm thinking about trying it myself. But I think that's the first question. I think some people might disagree. Some people might just be like, let her rip on, without thinking about the VTT at all. But I think putting a little bit of effort and time in can actually make onboarding players to an online game better, and it can also make it so that if you're running online for the first time, you've put a little bit of thought into the platform through which you're going to be giving players a lot of information other than just your words.
So in that fidelity of information notion, and you're as a GM, no matter what you're doing, online, in person, whatever it may be, you're delivering information and you want that fidelity of information to come through to your players. I often talk about that the idea of a GM has a story and a world in their head, and they want as closely as possible the players to have a similar story and picture in their head of the world. There will be differences, but you want that fidelity between what's in the GM's head to show up and be a picture in the player's mind. Same back and forth. Doesn't matter where you're doing this. That's the truth. What would you say is different about delivering information when you're in person as opposed to online GMing? One of the things that always gets talked to, or if you've ever played online, it's kind of step one of like, oh, here's a hiccup, is people talking over each other online does not work. Full stop. Like it just breaks down because you don't have any clue really that they're doing it. Whereas in person, if three people talk at once, you literally know all three of them talked at once, and you probably even heard one of them and maybe not the others. But online, it just becomes like that just goes into nothing. It disappears. You don't even know everybody talked at once, other than there was something happened. I have no idea what. So the GM has that responsibility of metering information, and players have a responsibility to just understand. I don't think anybody generally got there, but if y'all remember back to the pandemic, Zoom manners and Zoom etiquette of like, hey, you're online, maybe mute while you're eating chips into the microphone, that stuff.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things as a GM when you're thinking about, all right, I'm running online, fidelity of information. How does that shift from in-person to online play?
Yeah, so running online and in person are two completely different things, and I actually enjoy them for completely different reasons. The talking over each other is actually solved like so well by Always On Initiative in Shadowdark. It is one of the reasons I think, like, Shadowdark I don't think was designed to be played online, but that single rule, just like calling initiatives online and doing everything in turns and in rounds is so great. So that's number one. That solves almost all the cross talk kind of stuff. The second thing is that you have to be prepared for less player-to-player role play, and almost everything tends to, especially if you're running with people who haven't played together a lot, everything tends to run through the GM. So you tend to be more on than you might be. Like, players planning is more difficult, I have found, maybe for experienced tables, it's not. But it tends to be a little bit more awkward at first, before everyone kind of figures out the cadence of people's voices and what it sounds like when somebody stops or what someone, And then the other thing is, like, it's easier if everyone has video on. It's easier if everyone is wearing headphones and there's no noise bouncing around. Like, those things are super disruptive, and you just don't have to deal with those necessarily in in-person play. There's lots of other disruptions, somebody making fart jokes or whatever.
So that's everywhere.
But that also is an online thing. So as far as, like, me delivering information, though, what I have found is that when I'm describing a space online, the reason I use a VTT is because I find that the kind of distance between people, the literal, like, virtual distance, actually reduces the fidelity of information, because people are in their own space and there's just less, whatever it is, that kind of ephemeral thing that happens when you're in person, when you're talking to somebody face to face with them, where it's harder to read that stuff. It's harder to read tone, and it's harder to read body language. I think it's easier when I have a VTT where I can show someone a room, reveal it on the map, and then describe it afterwards. Because I found, and I think you found the same thing, Jody, I don't know if you noticed this, but when we were teaching online, the number one thing that I realized, like, very quickly is that the fidelity of information I was trying to get through to students was just less. I could say literally the exact same thing I would say in class with an example on the board or, screen shared on Zoom, and students would understand it worse online when I would explain it to them. And that is largely because of all the various distractions and all the fact that they weren't a captive audience. And players are the same way. I think you have to figure out how to engage players when you can't grab their attention from a few feet away. I don't know. That is the hardest part, and that's the sort of the thing that I haven't been able to solve for. I know some GMs run successful games where their players are very engaged, and that's just not something I feel like I've solved, because it's much easier online to have moments of checking out against your own will.
Yeah.
And so I was going to ask you this, like, when you were a player, how did you find, like, other people's scenes? Like, was there ever a temptation? You have the whole internet available to you. What was how did you stay engaged in the game? How did your keeper, your GM, keep you and the rest of the players engaged? Because this is actually something that I think is really hard to do and is the biggest difference for me in terms of in-person and online.
So as I mentioned, we were using Zoom and Discord for dice rolling. And this was also a pretty veteran group, both in terms of age. I was one of the younger players in the group, which is saying something. There's one other person who was noticeably younger than me, and the rest were older. So really veteran players and folks that were avid, regular RPG players. So we had that kind of understanding of what's necessary to stay engaged. Because it was Call of Cthulhu and it's a mystery, it really drives the wanting those clues and information to be delivered. That's a central hook. So that was a big part of it. Our keeper definitely did a good job of keeping the pace moving, frankly. We moved through that very large campaign at what I felt like was about as accelerated of a pace as you can. So speaking to when you were talking about being teachers in the classroom during the pandemic, what I would could say the same thing, have a visual, have displays that I wouldn't have even had in class that were frankly better and kids would still miss it, was like, my lectures have to be a tiny fraction of what they once were. If I'm getting through the nature of man and central historic conflicts in literature, I could do one. Like, hey, here's one, and it's what it's called. Okay, here's a clip. Like, it had to be this hyper stimulating environment. So for our Call of Cthulhu campaign, that happened recently. We had an episode where we were talking about handouts. Talking about handouts. I don't know why I went to the coaching clip there. And it was just like everything we could do to find the next handout. One of the tricks that GM Keeper used was we had a shared Google Drive as players we had access to. And one of the catnip was, oh, you've reached such and such. And in the trunk, you find, would you guys go to your shared Google Drive right now? And then bloop, 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 new images would show up and we'd all be filtering through those. So there was literally an incentive to go online and look at things that were part of the game. Now, if two people went off to study at the library and it wasn't your scene, I'll be honest, I had my miniatures and paints there and I would start painting a miniature and be kind of half tuned in. And we sort of understood that like, oh, somebody else is having a scene. My character wouldn't be there. So there's an element of like, it's my job to be a tuned in player and kind of pay attention, but also there's an element of like, hey, what's the essential information to deliver? Again, though, there's a difference here that I cannot get past of it's a mystery game. So those clues keep you engaged second by second. Whereas if it was slogging through a dungeon and we split the party, man, I don't really care what, Bill and Ted are doing in the next hallway. So I don't know. It's a give and take and definitely difficult to keep attention as somebody who is verbally engaging, my friend. You have a higher than average ability to leverage those things and draw people in with your voice and again, doing the voice acting and things. One of the things I'm hearing though, as I'm thinking of you voice acting and extemporaneous NPCs and how much you enjoy that, for me, that's a part of my prep that I have to spend a lot of time on. And that got me thinking about prep. And a lot of folks online will talk about running Shadow Dark and really trusting the random tables and the random system and that it is a generative game. We are rolling it out and seeing what shows up as we go. I have maybe a Dyson logo map and then it's going to populate as we play it. Cool, rad. Wow, that seems like it would be so much harder to play that way with an online game as opposed to a scripted session scene by scene. Do you find that the case or is that not so much?
So here's the thing is that playing online has some very significant benefits, especially for people like us that like miniatures and like terrain. So, but also, even if you just want to play theater of the mind, I think playing online has some actual, real, tangible benefits. And those are that you're already using a piece of technology. And so for me, I always just have random generators pulled up and I can very easily pull up a generic map. I can go almost anywhere that I can't really do that if we're playing in person and I want to have all those spaces represented in miniatures and terrain, which is something that you and I really enjoy. If we were playing Theater of the Mind in person, then this wouldn't be a particularly profound juxtaposition. The other thing that I find playing online that is interesting and something that's kind of giving me pause is that I find it is much easier to run rules-heavy games online than it is playing in person. There's two reasons for this. First, in person, I like everyone. I don't want people on computers. I don't really want people if I'm running 5e, I don't really want people using D&D Beyond or whatever. If we're playing online, then I'm less likely to care about that. Now, of course, the 5th edition game I'm running, everyone's using paper character sheets, which is great because we're playing 2014 D&D and they updated D&D Beyond, and that is a whole thing that I don't really want to get into. So long story short, we're still playing with paper character sheets, but I still find that it's easier to run for me because all of my references are just in tabs. I don't have a bunch of books I have to comb through. And as much as I hate to admit it, there is a book fatigue that happens at the table, like when you have to have multiple references. And I understand that some people feel like that kind of happens with Shadowdark and Cursed Scrolls. I don't really agree with that just because having played 5th edition with what felt like 16 different books and like classes all over the place and spells all over the place. That even if you're limiting it to like 1 or 2 expansion content books.
Yeah, there's a form difference between a zine, a Curse Scroll zine, and any Wizards of the Coast book.
Yeah, so
more words.
What I'll say is that online tools, online rollers, which we actually don't do either. We roll all of our dice physically. I feel like I have a lot of experience running online, but I don't
Matt,
know.
Couldn't they cheat?
Okay, so I guess we can change this, but the last thing I'm going to say is that online tools are super useful, and because of my deep want for analog play when we're playing in person, I don't use them at the table to like generate stuff. I roll everything physically. So I can roll up random encounters super easily, and so that is very nice and actually makes things easier. As far as cheating goes, Jody, I had a colleague who I told when I was like, oh, he's playing online. He was like, oh, I play online. And he said, well, what do you guys, what BTT do you use? Like, I use Albert Rodeo. And he goes, oh, just well, like, how does it handle dice rolling? And I go, I don't know. I've literally never used the dice roller. It turns out it's fine. It's pretty cool, having now experienced it on the GM and player side. If you're playing with people who are going to cheat, which he was like, oh, we have to use a dice roller because otherwise, people, we just assume people are cheating. And I was like, I wouldn't play with those people. So
yeah, no, that's a much different conversation than what's it like to GM online. Let me ask you this about the 2 games you've run or are running or whatever, the 2 genres, because there's 2 genres here. Your 5e game, 5e notwithstanding, is a long-term campaign.
Yes.
Whereas the Dolmenwood sessions using Shadow Dark rules that you ran recently were each one-shots, correct?
Yep.
Okay. One shot versus long-term campaign. Any difference there because of the virtual environment, or all the same kind of stuff applies that you would apply at the tabletop in terms of planning and thinking? Because for me, the thinking around a one shot and the thinking around campaigns are very, very different. The problems are wildly different.
Yeah. So the one shot was interesting because it was very much a sandbox one shot where this is something I could do in person, but it would take way more time. I basically made a virtual bulletin board with a bunch of information on it and put that on the VTT as a big image and sent players the text files of everything that was on this board that were all like rumors basically and jobs and things, and let them pick like, what do you want to do? And that was super cool. It felt like an authentic experience, but it also didn't feel like a traditional one shot where there's like a very clear this is the one shot. There were like probably 12 one shots in there, but because I have Dolmenwood prepped in my head quite a bit, it was all good. The experience that I want to highlight though as being very different than an online game is John's Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And the reason I'm going to highlight this is because he uses Foundry, and he has a bunch of scripts and modules and macros and things that automate tons of stuff that I don't use. And it was awesome. He's running an open table, and his open table is extremely efficient with players' time to a point where I was genuinely inspired by how efficient it was. What I saw was someone who had curated their modules and curated their macros to a degree that produced the exact kind of game that he wanted to run. And that was a level of customizability that online games can give you that looks different in person. I think that that online games, getting to the dungeon, automatically, like, your character sheet being automatically loaded in. I literally pushed like 3 buttons and created my characters and didn't roll any dice to create my character. I uploaded a JSON file, and it was up in the Forge, up in Foundry, and I could click on stats and roll dice. I didn't roll any physical dice. Like, there was a level of I only needed to figure out a couple of ways to interact with the VTT, but I could play. I don't know how much of that would be, like, for you who claims to be a Luddite, I don't know how you would interact with the platform. I got it very easily. there were a couple of things that were a little bit fiddly. But long story short, it facilitated that one-shot style play that you get from an open table in a way that was genuinely inspiring. And I learned a lot of things, I think, from how he ran that game, how he kept the pacing going online, how he called initiative. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out like that as I can't extol the virtues of everything that he did, but like genuinely leveraging the VTT to do what you want it to do. For a one-shot, it was great. And I can tell that there's some different things that you would do if you had that kind of customizability for a long-term campaign. For me, because so much of what we do is still analog, all the notes are analog. I don't really do handouts. I do images. I send players images, which is very nice. I do that via our Discord channel, and that's where all that stuff is contained. I have individual Discord channels, text channels for each individual player that are private just for them, so I can send them messages that might, this is 5th edition, so we're doing some character stuff. So if there's like a secret message or something like that I just want them to have. Anyways, so it's stuff like that facilitates long-term play and campaign play that kind of disaggregates information. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question because I can only speak from my experience, and I think that there's a wide variety of experiences of in-person play. Holy cow, is there a wide variety of inspirations? There's a wide variety of online play situations and styles. Perhaps more? I don't know. Maybe not, but maybe.
Right. Adjacent hobby and somehow different hobby. Right. Like just
Totally.
to that same degree of, well, my table plays AD&D and my table plays Tunnels and Trolls and my table plays Shadow Dark. Those are different table experiences. Every one of those is going to feel different. And I don't think online is any different in that regard. I think because there's a technology barrier, I think it's probably reductivist that most people think of it as one thing, whereas every online game is just as varied as every tabletop game, to use the old Hankrin Furnail, hermetic games, that each one is its own kind of sealed, unique, shared experience, and everyone's going to be different. And I think, as is often the case, if nothing else, our show is angling for trying to have a nuanced discussion about stuff that gets, quick tagline dismissed. And I think, a little bit of getting the cart out ahead of the horse here is that's what I'm realizing as we're talking through this is I've been doing that I'm like, oh, it's online play. That's one thing. And what I'm hearing you say as you talked about these different experiences is it's not one thing. There are many styles of play. Yeah. There are many tools you can bring to bear, and they can feel different. The notion of showing pictures was a huge part of my Call of Cthulhu campaign, and that's literally ICRPG, and the IC index card is laying out pictures of things, and just here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a picture. And I've seen some people, if you ever jump over on that Discord and look at examples of people's play and people's tables of how deeply enriched at a in-person table the notion of just flopping out pictures can be, it is beautiful and an art form of GMing that I someday would like to explore. Sure. And frankly, it's one that feels like a pretty natural bond between an online game that lives in a world of like, let me just send you pictures of what I'm seeing. Again, this would require planning and scripting to some degree, but it's a lot easier on the fly at an online game to look up a picture than it is when you're in person.
And Jody, you've heard me do this before, so I'll keep it quick. But for all the listeners out there, I will say the one thing that is super important for me is to have a file structure on my computer that makes it very easy to find stuff. So I use Obsidian to do all my note taking and session prep, and I know people who use Obsidian in way more sophisticated ways than I do. It's its own hobby unto itself. The markdown sort of folks will know, but I dabble in all these things and use them in the ways that I think that they're useful. Having a file structure that allows me to know exactly where my maps are of different styles, of different places, and I can basically just take a map, drag and drop it into Owlbear Rodeo, load it up, bam, and put it in front of my players very quickly, hopefully while they're talking. That is something that comes from both experience, but also takes a bunch of upfront planning. Not upfront planning that you probably wouldn't be doing in person, just different. So what I want to do is ask you something, though. What would it take, or are you just a full no, but what would it take to get you to try and run online? Like, because now that you have admitted that it's not just one thing, like, is there something that there's been a lot of me talking this app, so I want to get you to tell me what it would take for you to run a game online.
Well, there's a lot of you talking because I'm a, you know, and it's not a shame. It's like, I got plenty of hobbies. I could do a whole episode by myself about painting miniatures, right? Like Maybe we will, Jody. Oh God, nobody wants to hear that. So it's interesting, that question of what would it take. My initial threshold is a technology shame that I bury and I carry with me, and I feel embarrassed about it. I don't like to talk about my lack of technology in my life. And it's not, there is that. I'm exaggerating, of course. More so the experience I want to have. As you talked about, that Evil Unnamed had curated a game to be exactly a particular experience, and it was neat seeing all those pieces come together. For me, a swords and wizardry, heroic fantasy, my own version of the D&D that lives in my head, using it as the generic like RPG fantasy, D20 fantasy game, is bespoke. Like, it is, I have problematically at times a clear, this is what I want to do and the experience I want to have. And then a component of that is sitting at the table. So my first thought on what would it take for me to run an online game is, it couldn't be a sword and sorcery D20 fantasy game.
Oh, interesting.
That because I would be fighting against this deeply calcified image in my head of what that looks like and what I want. I would always just be chasing getting back to the table.
Yeah, and it ain't that. It ain't that.
And as you said at the top, like, if that's what you want, well, then do that. And I this is maybe my journey into becoming old gamer grognard guy is really shown in this. But I'm just a proponent of, like, if there's an experience you want, go have that experience. Don't ask something else to bend to be that experience, right? You don't have to make everything fit what you want it to be. Just go and do the thing. So that would be the first step, is I would have to find a game that I was excited about. And I went, man, running this online would be really cool because it would enhance that experience in a way that being
perhaps Cyborg.
It's get out of my head. So I have been, my nightstand reading, you'll be delighted to know, has been some old Shadow Dark, excuse me, too many shadows, Shadow Run source books. I am deeply interested in the Morkborg Portborg of Cyborg. So the game Cyborg is an absolute hoot, and it is just close enough to Shadowrun's world, which I think is fantastic. Shadowrun's game system is not for me. And there is a possibility, I mean, undeniably, a world in which hackers are hacking things and doing all of these tech things that I know are words. I know that's a word that exists, is hacking. Computers are involved. I think the internet's
beep,
a part of it.
Boop.
That's what computers sound like. Beep, boop. So that sort of thing would jump out to me. Funny enough, the game that I think would be kind of fun is an alternative Wild West game through an online vessel, because combat drops back in my mind in an alternate world, weird Wild West. Getting shot is bad. So, like, I don't have to do as much hack and slash and running around in high heroics of swinging on chandeliers, which is the sort of thing that is an in-person experience I want. So I think for me, that would be it, is finding a game system that there's something about the system and the world that says, man, imagining this in an online environment sounds really cool and engaging. Because again, a D20 fantasy sword and sorcery, sword and board, wizards and wonderment and dragons, I'm just always going to compare it against this deeply beloved thing that is in my heart that happens at a table with my friends and has strange shaped dice and little once upon a time lead bendy figurines bopping around on the board. So that's part of it. So I'm going to take this to one more question before we hear from our sponsors. For you and I, the video game RPG touchstone, the first game that jumps to mind, I think, especially if we're thinking again, high fantasy hack and slash, is Diablo. Mm-hmm. For a younger audience, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be that game that they will, you think RPG and it's a fantasy game and what would that look like? And there are some analogs of seeing that picture in your head. I think there is a fear, hope, worry, and excitement about the day that playing online looks like a game of Diablo or looks like a game of Baldur's Gate 3. Kind of two just high-levelly what-if wish book questions. Are you excited about that? Would that be like, yeah, I'm here for that. I can just plug and play these assets. Let's do that. That sounds rad. And, you know, do you really think we're going there?
All right. So this is, I hate it. I hate that. And I will just be very honest, and folks can disagree. But like for me, that is not what I'm chasing. I'm not chasing the video game aesthetic. I'm not chasing like 3D models. For me, again, like I said at the top of the show, is the whole purpose of this is to try and get back to the table as much as possible, which is a pipe dream. It is a different experience, but I like representing stuff on a map. I will say that just to kind of, again, sneak a few best practice things here at the end of the show, I think best practice is when you're crawling, not everybody should have a token. Use a party token and just move that around. And then if you need to, you can kind of split out. But, you know, when I played with John, like it was one token. We did combat with one token. I mean, you didn't necessarily need tokens for everybody. You don't need a model for everybody. I don't think you need a bunch of animations for spells. Like that stuff eats up time, and the whole purpose of this hobby is it's a rhetorical hobby in a lot of ways, right? If I'm going to describe the flame that comes out of your hand when you cast Burning Hands, if I press a button and now there's flames coming out of your pawn or your model, your 3D model, to me, that cheapens the experience, because if I want that experience, there's a whole nother hobby that can give that to me. And there's a whole nother hobby that supports multiplayer that can give that to me. I know that I am not necessarily, I don't even know if I'm in the majority, but I know there's a significant number of people that do want that. And if we get there, great. If we don't, great. It is not for me. And my last piece that kind of goes along with this, my last piece of like best practice is look at Shadowdark as a game and let that guide your VTT and online play. And from that, I mean, look at the aesthetic of the game. It is an attempt to strip things away, not put things in. And I think that is one of the things that I tried to abide by when I ran a couple of sessions of Shadowdark Online. It is, I think, what John tried to establish. Were there a lot of bells and whistles? Sure, probably working in the background, but turn to turn, round to round, it was Shadowdark. And it was Shadowdark Online, and it was a different thing, but it was super fun. And he didn't try and make it into something that it couldn't be, or something that the game itself didn't want. And I think that is kind of an interesting, and to me, it is somewhat of a North Star. So, you know, there are games that maybe are going to go there. Maybe Wizards of the Coast does sort of, you know, their VTT ends up working, that, you know, or maybe Draw Steel, right? Draw Steel has a VTT that's kind of bespoke. Maybe it's awesome and gives you some three-dimensionality and stuff. And people seem to like, you know, the platforms that they like. For me, keeping it simple and don't let perfect or don't let hyper-realism be the enemy of playing online. That's what I would say.
Matt, those are all starting to sound an awful lot like core takeaways. So I think you got a little ahead of yourself. We'll come back after the sponsor and put a bow on those.
I got more stuff to say. This episode is brought to you by Magic Mouth Audiobooks, because reading with your eyes is for scholars and suckers. Let's face it, between dungeon delving, torch juggling, and fending off swarms of knife-wielding goblins, who has time to read anymore? That's where Magic Mouth Audiobooks comes in. Just slap on a rune-inscribed gem onto your temple and let the disembodied voice do the reading for you. They've got a vast library of over 10,000 books. That's almost all the books in the world, including such famous classics as 50 Shades of Fae, The Necromancer's Cookbook, and To Kill a Basilisk. Magic Mouth has something for every adventurer, scholar, and necro-curious teen. Jody, you have been reading via Magic Mouth audiobooks. And I know you're not much of a reader normally. But boy, howdy, have you been churning through some tomes.
You know, you wouldn't think it would work, but coloring books in this medium are outstanding. They've never been more vivid, and they even somehow got the crayon smell in there. I can smell them. It's so lovely. We gather around the campfire, Cookie gets the pot going, and man, I just sit there with some dandelions and some crayons. And man, it's so great.
Not quite sure how it works, but I'm going to check that out, Jody. So you can sign up today, as I will be, using code Whispers in the Walls. Not creepy at all. For a free trial and one complimentary tome of Tomes and Tentacles. Just be careful. Some narrators have opinions and may try and correct your spell casting as they read. Magic Mouth Audiobooks. Feed your mind. Terrify your ears.
Alrighty, let's bring this topic into the light with some core takeaways about playing online. What you got, Matt?
All right, so my first one is there's a whole spectrum of options. There's no VTT, playing purely theater of the mind with everybody's big heads on your Zoom block tiles, all the way to highly immersive and automated and bells and whistles. My recommendation is start small. Start with something and build from there. No reason to start without anything if you kind of know what you want, but start small and then build.
I love that option and would definitely be the way I would have to go. You know, when I hear people talking about playing online and it's the way to get a game, and some of the online discourse around RPGs right now is like, oh, that's the way you're going to play. If you're going to find a group, you got to go online to find a group. I just want to throw in a little reminder, and this is my own bias coming through. There's no right way to play. Like, just get out there and play an RPG, so says Sly Flourish, is, you know, that you don't have to play online. I don't feel like I'm missing out. I also think it's neat when I hear about your game and what's going on with these online games. Both are cool, and my lack of play is just because I don't feel the need to do that. If I moved somewhere that was far away and it was the only way I could RPG, that would be a different discussion. But if you live somewhere where you can meet a few folks and get out there in person, that's okay. If you enjoy playing online, that's okay. There is no one right way to play.
One of the pillars of our show here, the last one that I have is that this is an auditory hobby. By and large, one of the most important things you can do if you're playing online is make yourself sound good. Not for some highfalutin reason, but literally so that your players can hear what you're saying. And that to me is one of the things that is a non-negotiable. If your players can't understand you, or your internet connection is not good enough that you're not coming through clearly, that's a killer, I think, of any online game.
I think that notion of you got to start there with, like, can you get the GMing voice out is huge. And I think that's true both online and in person, of being mindful of your delivery and what is the auditory environment you're playing in. That's a big one. And I'm going to follow your lead here and go, what's a piece of advice about online play that is applicable online, in person, whatever? And you said it's an auditory hobby first, and I agree. And then that auditory is trying to create pictures. Man, using those visuals online, whether it's via VTT or clip art or whatever, do that, rock that, use that. If you're in person, miniatures, drawings, pictures. Hold up the book. Pictures, pictures, pictures. Get the picture from your head as the GM into the head of those pesky, pesky players. And thank you for tuning into our online shenanigans. So as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences for your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can reach out via YouTube or on Facebook. But best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel, where we both are all the dang time. You can find links to those feeds and any of the other materials we referenced in this show's episodes, show notes. Until next time, clean up your audio.
Oh my God. At least people can know we do this live. Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023. That's how it's done, Jody.
Weird flex.